Hi, everyone. A little bit of technical issues that hopefully are being sorted out. Hope everyone is well today. I'm coming to you. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, and I'm coming to you from Montreal or Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of different First Nations. And I have a number of recent developments in Canadian foreign policy that I thought I would talk about, and then open it up to discussion and debate and criticism, or wherever people want to take it. Just to start off, I thought it would be good to start off on a positive note. It was the fifth anniversary of the Lima Group, the founding of the Lima Group, a couple of days ago, and the recent taking to power of Gustavo Petro in Colombia, the confirmation that the Lima Group is a failed endeavor. Canada, of course, played a central role in creating the Lima Group, which was designed to overthrow Venezuela's government, and it has failed in that endeavor. So it's good to mark sort of a positive blow to Trudeau's foreign policy, which has been kind of been in shambles since there's a rise of progressive Latin American integrationist governments across the hemisphere over the past little bit. Today is the 1-year anniversary of the Taliban taking Kabul, and I thought I would talk a little bit about that question, which is that the media kind of portrayal on Afghanistan is quite remarkable. You hear an incredible amount in the Canadian media about those who collaborated with the Canadian military, and in fact, the Canadian government hasn't done more to get those people out of the country. And a lot of those people were or are in some degree of danger, and I certainly am sympathetic to people who are in danger getting exile in Canada or refugee status or whatnot. But it is a it's quite out of whack how much attention that issue gets versus the question of the asset seizure, the Americans seizing billions and billions of dollars in Afghan assets, and the sanctions on the Afghan government, which are having much more significant humanitarian impact than the question of not helping people out of the country. We should also point out that people, as a historically speaking, when you collaborate with foreign forces, that is not usually seen in a positive light by be that those who collaborated with the French in Algeria or elsewhere. So we should put that this question of Afghans who collaborated with the Canadian military into some sort of historical context. Now, of course, the Taliban is very objectionable. A lot of their ideology and their practices are to my mind, very objectionable, and I think from the standpoint of most people in the world. But the sanctions and the defining the Taliban as, which is now the government, defining it as a terrorist organization, has very significant humanitarian consequences. So in today's issue of the Hill Times, there's an op-ed from a representative from World Vision and Islamic Relief, and they talk basically about how Canadian policy vis-a-vis Afghanistan means that the humanitarian work has been basically completely kiboshed. So they write, quote, international sanctions against the Taliban, and more importantly, Canada's anti-terror provisions of the criminal code have meant that for us to continue delivering life-saving aid directly to Afghan civilians could mean us potentially facing prosecution under Canada's criminal code. So any paying of taxes beyond like fuel, because that goes to the Afghan Taliban, which is the Afghan government, that can be viewed as indirectly supporting the Taliban and could have Canadian NGO facing legal troubles here. And so this combined with the seizure, the American seizure of I think it's $7 billion or $8 billion in Afghan assets, central bank assets, has had an incredibly damaging effect on the economic situation, and is quite frankly, much more significant in its toll than the question of those who supported the Canadian military not getting out of the country. And yet we have, immeasurably more media discussion about the question of those allied with Canada not getting out of the country. So, and it's quite clearly, and again, I think the Taliban government, from what I can tell, not, following in that closely, but, it's pursuing all kinds of, hideous policies. But we're having a situation that's, getting worse and worse of humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan that is likely to get even worse in coming months. The Canadian Dimension had an article a few days ago titled "Retaliation Isn't Justice," that looked at the CIA's assassination of Al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri. I'm not sure I pronounced that correctly, but which took place, I think, about 10 days ago or so. And basically, the story was pointing out that Trudeau celebrated the assassination, and basically arguing that this is not justice. You can't just have the CIA assassinate individuals, and not only the Canadian government not condemn it, but in fact Trudeau applauded it. And I think that's a serious question that needs to be looked at. And the U.S. giving itself the right to assassinate people a little bit all over the world, be it in Somalia or be it in Syria or Iraq, is a massive question about the state of justice in this world, and the Canadian government not upholding international law, saying it supports the rules-based international order, but not upholding international law and these types of things. And this goes right back to the whole invasion of Afghanistan, more than 20 years ago. The idea is that, they're invading to get bin Laden. Well, the Taliban actually offered bin Laden up if evidence was provided that he was responsible for the 9/11 attacks, and basically that they were prepared to give him over to a third country. And the Americans just ignored that. They didn't want anything to do with that. It wasn't about finding bin Laden. It was about, occupation for geostrategic reasons, for military industrial complex reasons. And then you have a situation, and I was making this point, 15 years ago, in the height of Canadian military involvement in Afghanistan, warfare in Afghanistan, that, you associate feminism with foreign occupation. That's going to whip back negatively on feminism, right? People tend not to like foreign occupations, and so this places this idea. It's the foreigners trying to impose these ideas, rather than, of course, Afghan women wanting equal rights or something approaching equal rights. And another point, I mean, that wasn't, I don't think that was a point that others were making at the time too. But one of the things I argued back then, I pointed out back then, that was, I don't think anyone was mentioning, was that right at the same time that we were supposedly, in Afghanistan to advance women's rights or help girls go to school, the Canadian government supported overthrow of the elected government in Haiti. And according to the Lancet, the British Medical Journal, in the 22 months after the coup, they did this big study. They reported on the study, and it found that there was up to 35,000 women raped in the Port-au-Prince region in Haiti in the aftermath. Some of it very political, and some of it just sort of breakdown in social order. And so here we were advancing, women's rights in Afghanistan, supposedly advancing women's rights in Afghanistan, when our policies in Haiti were quite clearly, right at the exact same time, undermining women's rights. But that question, of course, was just ignored by the dominant media and in the country. Another issue that came up this week was that the Vasi Capellos, or however you pronounce her name, on the CBC Power and Politics, she interviewed the head of the Canadian military, Wayne Ears, about the report that the New York Times initially did, and then it was confirmed by Global News, that Canadian Special Forces are in the ground in Ukraine. And the head of the Canadian military's response was quite fascinating, is that he pushed back hard. He basically said that this is endangering the Canadian troops, and he wouldn't answer the question. And then he said that media speculation in media feeds Russian disinformation, which is itself becoming a weapon. So the Canadian media speculating or reporting on that people were saying that there were Canadian special forces on the ground in Ukraine was part of a Russian weapon. And also this point that Canadian troops, this would endanger Canadian troops, was also like, no one was arguing for like the coordinates of the Canadian Special Forces. Ukraine is a huge country. To say they're on the ground isn't exactly telling the Russians where they are. So this business of endangering the Canadian troops is quite ridiculous. But particularly this idea that the Canadian public knowing where its troops are at, or in other words, the Canadian public knowing that Canada's basically at war with Russia, that was Russian disinformation. Another issue that I thought I would bring up, I didn't initially didn't want to really bring up this issue, even though I thought about it right away when I heard about it. But Clayton Ruby, a prominent Toronto lawyer, passed away, I guess maybe 10 days ago. And my initial reaction was, my first interaction with Clayton Ruby was back in 2002 when I was in the Concordia Student Union. I didn't know who he was. And he published an op-ed in the Globe and Mail just attacking the Concordia Student Union as being anti-Semitic, attacking the anti-corporate globalization movement, attacking the UN World Conference Against Racism that was held in Durban in South Africa. And he did this like as a lefty. So it was him and two others, self-described lefties, who had this really, really vicious op-ed in the Globe and Mail, basically saying the left was fixating on Israel, and it was a sign of anti-Semitism, very much the precursor to some of what we've seen happen with Jeremy Corbyn. So Clayton Ruby is somebody who has been involved in some important struggles, legally speaking, to advance clearly social justice causes. So there's all this sort of like praise of Ruby after his death, correctly. I don't, think as a general rule, you best not, unless it gets into the political domain, best not to, speak ill of those who've just died. But it just kept taking on a bigger and bigger kind of deal, and to the point where a few days ago, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs tweeted about Ruby's passing multiple days after he passed. And they said, quote, deeply saddened by the loss of Clayton Ruby, a champion for justice who co-authored this prescient op-ed in 2002. The phenomenon he warned of has now unfortunately embedded itself in the public discourse to the shame and detriment of progressivism. So basically, they tweeted, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, his op-ed from 2002, which was just attacking the left for challenging Israel, attacking the anti-corporate globalization movement, and the Concordia Student Union that I was at that point vice president of. And then people like Bernie Farber from Canadian Anti-Hate Network, who's, frames himself as, we talked about him previously, but frames himself as a sort of anti-racist, but as basically also a pro-apartheid activist. He then quote tweeted CIJA and boasted that it was him that helped get the op-ed produced and into the Globe and Mail. And in his tweet, in Bernie Farber's tweet, he tags Erwin Kotler, who also in the Globe and Mail things praised Clayton Ruby. Erwin Kotler, of course, is a leading anti-Palestinian and somebody who's aligned with imperialism, Canadian imperialism more generally. And he also, and Bernie Farber also tagged United Jewish Appeal of Toronto, and which is the biggest, most important pro-apartheid organization in the country, because it's them who sponsors the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. And United Jewish Appeal next month is actually hosting the launch of their fundraising appeal, which is George W. Bush and Stephen Harper in conversation. And in their announcement for this Harper and Bush conversation, they say this is, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but it's basically, this is the most exciting, one of the most exciting talks that we've ever sponsored. So here I just find it quite ironic to see how much kind of left sort of glow support was given to Clayton Ruby, who clearly did, as a prominent lawyer, he did some important cases and advanced justice in many ways. But he was a vicious and he was, clearly anti-Palestinian, and he smeared the left, and he never backed away from that. And I think it's indicative of the fact that there's no call, like someone like Sven Robinson, right, was glowing about Clayton Ruby, when he died, and I think he was friends with Ruby, so understandably, but there is a point at which the political effect of that becomes something that goes beyond personal friendships, and clearly CIJA understood that, right? They understood it was all this glow on Clayton Ruby. Let's talk about how he was attacking the left 20 years ago for its obsession with Israel and its the anti-corporate globalization movement being anti-Semitic and whatever. So there really is no cost. Unfortunately, it's still in a situation where there's very little cost for openly anti-Palestinian positions. Another death that has a political foreign policy kind of element to it that's worth talking about was Bill Graham. Bill Graham was a foreign affairs minister for a while and defense minister. And the Canadian press story about Bill Graham's passing was titled "Navigated Canada's Opting Out of Iraq War." Okay, and then with Bill Graham in the subtext. In that story, they quote Bill Graham's chief of staff at the time, Eugene Lang, in the Canadian Press article. Well, Eugene Lang, in his co-authored book about Canada's role in Afghanistan, but it actually delves into Haiti and Iraq and other places. He talks about Canadian officials boasting at the time of the 2003 Iraq War, that Canada was in fact, as he put it, exceeded Canada's contribution to the fight in Iraq, quote, exceeded that of all but 3 other countries that were actually part of the coalition of the willing, right? So the Canadian government didn't participate in the coalition of the willing. And that was the primary thing that the Bush administration wanted, right? Official public endorsement of the invasion of Iraq. But, and that was a victory of the anti-war movement that we should, clearly won by mass protests, particularly here in Montreal, and the dynamic within Quebec politics with the upcoming Quebec elections, etc. That's a clear victory of the anti-war movement. But what the Canadian government did was simultaneously, they supported the Americans in so many different ways, to the point where they actually had legal opinion that because Canada was in charge of a naval battle group enforcing the blockade of Iraq, that Canada was legally at war with Iraq. Canadian troops that fought in American units. There was a Canadian general that ends up leading 35,000 troops, all kinds of, airspace, all kinds of different ways Canada supports the American invasion and then occupation of Iraq. But the media 20 years later, when Bill Graham passes, it's all about how he supposedly, kept Canada out of the war. And there is a truth in that. Again, didn't join the coalition of the willing, but that's, did everything they could quietly to support the American invasion, and left out of that discussion, as was the case on the 10th anniversary, where Jean Chrétien present what he did in Iraq as just like, he was far-sighted and he didn't trust American intelligence. That wasn't the issue. It was power. It was mobilization by anti-war forces, and that, of course, is just ignored in these historic discussions of what happened, why Canada didn't participate in Iraq. Another story I thought I would mention is there was a Canadian press article that was basically complaining about how Canada wasn't providing a frigate to a new NATO one of the 2 NATO battle groups that were sort of in Eastern Europe and patrolling. So it said, quote, "For the first time in 8 years, Canadian warships are not involved in either of 2 NATO naval task forces charged with patrolling European waters and defending against Russian threats." So basically what's going on is that Canada has a bunch of naval vessels, frigates, that are focused on China, and there's not enough of them to be involved in all of these at one time. The other part is that Canada had 2 frigates in response to the Russian invasion, sent another frigate to Eastern Europe, and so that needs to come back home and needs to be turned over and all that kind of stuff. So basically, because we got naval vessels in China or towards in Asia, and we've had more than usual in Eastern Europe, the Canadian Navy is not in a position. And this story was sort of like bemoaning that we don't have the capacities to, basically be in a position to be engaged in, wars with Russia and China at the same time. That's essentially what is kind of underlying it all. And then in the story, it mentions that there actually are still 2. It says, quote, "Canada has instead deployed 2 smaller Kingston-class coastal defense vessels to work with a different NATO naval force that is focused on finding and clearing enemy mines." So there still are Canadian naval vessels. It's just not the frigates, not the the big, most violent of the naval vessels. And then today, Anita Anand, defense minister, tweeted, said, quote, "Today we announced that HMCS Vancouver and Winnipeg will remain deployed in the Indo-Pacific until December 2022. And so here you have Canada's defense minister boasting that the Canadian naval vessels are going to stay, near China and run provocative maneuvers alongside U.S. naval vessels, and basically increase the likelihood of a conflict, stoke tension, but also basically undercut the small chance that humanity has to salvage long-term civilization by undercutting the international cooperation required to deal with the climate crisis. Right? You can't have conflict with China and the U.S. and deal with the climate crisis and then the cooperation required on that issue. And we've already seen that one of the Chinese reactions to Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan was to break off negotiations, bilateral talks around the climate. So this is I think a little bit of the state of the Canadian Navy. We at all times have our naval vessels, like that's 8,000, Anand presents this as like we're a Pacific nation. This is 8,000 kilometers from Canadian territory that we're talking about naval vessels. So that's obviously a troubling development. Now, the final issue I wanted to talk about is a bit of a broader issue, and it comes out of the debate that the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute hosted a few days ago about Canadian peacekeeping. And in that debate, it's worth taking worth watching. At points, it's kind of it's a little hard to watch. There's a few moments where one of the pro peacekeeping people is, I think, on the defensive in a way that's a little bit embarrassing. But it was an interesting debate. And in that debate, Walter Dorn, who is the preeminent voice in favor of UN peacekeeping in Canada, he's a professor at the Royal Military College and the Canadian Forces College. So he's an employee of the Department of National Defense. He's being criticized by all three of the critics. This sort of 3-2 debate. All three of the critics of UN peacekeeping, Canada's role in UN peacekeeping, cite Haiti, and one, Jemima Pierre from Black Alliance for Peace and UCLA prof, her whole talk is about Haiti and the UN occupation and how bad it's been for Haiti. Walter Dorn gets asked in the question period if he supports the UN mission in Haiti. And he says, to my mind, quite shockingly, considering the context, he just, without no equivocation, says yes. He says it's a good thing, the UN mission in Haiti. Well, I'm not going to get through it all, but the UN mission in Haiti comes out of the US, Canada, France, overthrowing democracy and thousands of elected officials. It enforces a coup government. It brings cholera to the country that kills tens of thousands of people. It's involved in all kinds of sexual assault of young women, young Haitian women. Then there's a whole crisis of what they call petit MINUSTA, which is the babies of UN troops that are, when the troops leave, the moms, single moms with children, all kinds of stigma around that. It's really quite a horror story. And with Walter Dorn, it's like, what would the UN mission have had to do in Haiti for you to say it wasn't a good thing? And the question of Walter Dorn on the UN mission in Haiti is important for a number of reasons. One, again, he's a prominent proponent of peacekeeping, and he's quoted in the Globe and Mail and CBC and all this kind of stuff. But also, he's a senior advisor on a fellow with the Rideau Institute, which is this which comes out of the ceasefire.ca, and it presents itself as an anti-war kind of like left-wing think tank. And here you have someone who is openly defending, quite frankly, Canada's worst imperial crime of the first decade of the century. Walter Dorn is explicitly, he actually was part of the UN mission in Haiti even. And this is supposedly like a left-wing foreign policy voice in this country. And the Rideau Institute, I don't know all the ins and outs, but my understanding is what sustains it financially is donations from individuals who I believe overwhelmingly are anti-war people, right? this is overwhelmingly sustained financially by people who are, genuine, either, anti-war, peace-minded, or even anti-imperialist. And so basically what Walter Dorn is that he represents the sort of liberal end of the Canadian military, right? If your option is Rick Hillier, we killed the scumbags, the former head of the Canadian military, that's what he said about Afghanistan, and Canadian military, we killed the scumbags, or your option is Walter Dorn, for their view of the Canadian military, I of course wholeheartedly prefer Walter Dorn's vision of the Canadian military than the really aggressive hard NATO US Rick Hillier vision for the Canadian military. But that has very little to do with the left, right? There's a whole other proposal for the Canadian military, which is let's have less of it, right? Let's not have a different type of Canadian military, i.e. peacekeeping. Let's have less of the Canadian military. And so what Rideau Institute is, so the head of Rideau Institute, Peggy Mason, she was a longtime Global Affairs Canada employee for like 2 decades, right? Positions with different ministers. And so what the Rideau Institute is, to a large extent, is it's sort of like the progressive end of the Canadian military and the progressive end of Global Affairs Canada. Well, again, I prefer the progressive end of Global Affairs Canada to the the harder pro-corporate, pro-empire end. But that's not, there's a whole other alternative on offer. That is the alternative that the progressive minded, international minded, egalitarian, anti-racist minded Canadians should be looking for and pursuing. So it's quite the debate, the UN debate that happened a few days ago is not just a comment on Walter Dorn or Peter Langwell, or two people who argued the pro-peacekeeping position. It's not just a comment on their opinion about the question of UN peacekeeping. It's a comment, I think, more generally on the left's interaction with Canada in the world, and even more and additionally, the fact that there is like a supposed institutional left, i.e. the Rideau Institute specifically, but the Rideau Institute does things with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives and other groups that are on the left, that it's alignment with the basic thrust of Canadian foreign policy, and I think there's something completely a totally different vision that progressive minded people should be articulated. And I also believe, quite frankly, when it comes to financial sustaining of these organizations, we should be much more kind of clear in the politics. And I'll just end now a little bit in that direction. And I think I mentioned last week that there's a new 6-part a documentary series on Canadian foreign policy that came out that I really invite people to watch. It's called Truth to Powerless, an investigation, Truth to the Powerless, an investigation into Canada's foreign policy. And not only is it it's a 6-part series, it's probably about 5 hours. It's goes into all kinds of things, history, current, mostly history stuff. Not only is it a good tool for consciousness raising, but I think it's also reflective of something that's quite positive, which is that this documentary series is it interviews Bill Graham, actually, another defense minister, another former defense minister, some top diplomats. But mostly what it's based upon is the activists, the voices of activists, and sort of critical academics. And the fact that they was able to pull off this 6-part series, I think is partly reflective of the fact there is this growth. It's totally marginal. Let's not big ourselves up too much, but it's totally marginal. But it's this growth of a sort of left wing. You call it anti-imperialist, you could call it internationalist, egalitarian-minded, sort of milieu of books, articles, critical of Canadian foreign policy. That's new. There's a real growth. I think that since I've been paying attention last 2 decades, huge increase in critical radical criticism of Canadian foreign policy. There's no doubt about that. Again, it's still at the margins. But it's taken over a bigger and bigger element of left thinking. Still outside of even really reaching into the NDP, but a bigger segment of left thinking. And there's much less interest in sort of mythologizing Canadian foreign policy that you even find even 10 years ago. Way more of that that was being done. And so the documentary series, I think, is not only a good tool for consciousness raising, it also reflects that there's this growth of these, sort of experts, left-wing experts in all these different domains of Canadian foreign policy. So obviously there's a lot of work ahead, but I think that's a positive development. And does anyone have any comments or questions? Go ahead, Laura.
Oh, thanks, Yves. And thanks for telling us about that series. I'm in the middle of it and I really enjoy it. I think what he does, which might make it somewhat palatable to people who don't share our views, is the fact that he does go to the other side and interview people there too. So I think there are people who might not want to see it might, be persuaded a little bit by that. I was just wondering, you say it's marginal and I would assume as much, but I'm just wondering, when it came out, did it get any discussion or coverage in the press? Do people even know it's there?
No, it hasn't gotten any discussion. No, it hasn't gotten any real discussion. There's an event, the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute's doing an event with Pitasana, the main filmmaker, in I think on the 24th. But no, it needs to, it needs to be pushed by. It's not going to be on CBC. It's not going to be on, So we need to push it in the networks that we have, and that's why I've tried to bring it up. I'm writing a story about it and framing some of what I've just talked about. But no, it hasn't gotten any attention. Oh. And there's a couple like sort of revelations. It's big historic revelations, but even the minister, the former defense minister, he I think uses the word, "We removed Aristide." Later on, he kind of goes back and says it wasn't a coup, but the language he actually uses when describing it is language that the Canadian government definitely won't you officially admit to won't use and officially. So I think that there's a couple of like things like that kind of maybe warrant articles directly about kind of furthering the case that Canada was involved in the 2004 coup in Haiti.
Mm-hmm. If there isn't, does anyone else have a question? Sorry, because I have a little bit of a separate question. Okay, then I'll go ahead. So I like seeing Dimitri Lascaris in it. I didn't really know that much about him until recently, and I always like listening to him. And I was just wondering, when he ran to head the Green Party and came quite close, do people think it was his fact he's clearly infinitely more progressive on foreign policy than the person that they chose or any of the other leadership of the Green Party? Do people think that might have been a key factor in his not being elected, and does he realize that, and is that why he's not planning to go forth again to run?
No, I would actually say the other way around. I mean, I'd say, well, both of those would be true. He part of why he did as well as he did was because he represented a bunch of people who were angry at the sort of, we all agree on Canadian foreign policy kind of stuff, and he'd been quite active on we did a lot of disruptions. We had the Disruption Network Canada, where we disrupted Trudeau multiple times on Palestine, and we disrupted Kotler and other people like that. So foreign policy was an important reason why a lot of people joined the Greens to vote for Dimitri. Of course, the Palestine question specifically was part of why, he'd been in this long battle with Elizabeth May, because she was angry that I don't know if you know that background, but he put forward a resolution in 2016 that the members voted for before the convention, at the convention, and then after the convention. They all three stages they voted for it, and then Elizabeth May forced a whole new special convention for 6 months later to just deal with one issue, that one resolution. Like, I mean, it's surreal. Like you saying it, you can, oh, that can't be actually true, but that's actually what happened. Again, a resolution was submitted to the convention that members had to, there's a voting system to see if it was allowed to be submitted. The members who were at the convention voted for it by a strong majority. And then there was an approval process post-convention, all three phases, it passed. And then Elizabeth May said, okay, we have to have a special convention in the middle of, in Calgary. They chose in Calgary thinking that was their best chance of winning. And then on the eve of the convention, Elizabeth May realized that she was going to lose, because we did a public letter where we got like Naomi Klein and Chomsky, I think maybe Roger Waters signed, I don't remember who. Anyways, a whole bunch of prominent people that signed it, calling on Green Party members to reaffirm their support for the resolution. And we released that, 48 hours or 4 days or a few days before the convention. And Dimitri did a big tour, did 25, 30 cities across the country. So Elizabeth May didn't expect that he would actually he basically, campaign on the thing and mobilize for the special convention. And then on the eve, she basically realized what was happening. And so she agreed to what was framed as a compromise resolution. And the compromise resolution, from anybody who knows the issue, was actually stronger, because the BDS resolution that was passed that Dimitri pushed, it was only BDS for occupied territories. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just like BDS of Israel, right, proper, quote unquote. But the direct BDS formulation was removed. So it was a much more expansive about what the pressure tactics that Canada should bring on Israel, but the actual BDS formulation was slightly softened, and so Elizabeth May agrees to this compromise resolution, and then because she has the media microphone, her and the Israel lobby have the media microphone, she basically says we just got rid of the BDS resolution. But even though and because again she has the microphone, so the what comes out of the convention is her depiction of what had just happened, even though anybody who bothers to look at it, knows anything about it, knows that's absolutely not true. So again, she organized a special convention to block only one resolution that would have passed at the convention. It can cost a couple $100,000 for the party to organize that, of course, and then agrees to a compromise, and then completely spins what the actual compromise was coming out of it. So there was this big beef between, and then it makes all this. Elizabeth May kicked Dimitri off of he was in the Elizabeth May's shadow cabinet. She kicks him off of that. And anyway, so that the Palestine thing was, really important to all of, again, both sides, and those who were supporting him and those who opposed him. And then I think that's in part why the Israel lobby really got involved in the Green Party leadership race, because they understood the issue. And Elizabeth May, of course, that was Annemie Paul. Elizabeth May threw all her weight behind Annemie Paul, who was the candidate the Israel lobby, of course, was also backing. And so if it would have been, there's no doubt, if Elizabeth May hadn't completely broken her own commitments around the Green Party race, Dimitri would have won. That's basically certain. But so Eileen, go ahead.
Yes, hi. I listen to CBC radio and watch CBC news on television. Has CBC ever demonstrated any independence of the Canadian government? As I listen to the coverage of the current war in Ukraine, it's just out and out propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, I would. There's no doubt on the Ukraine stuff, and I've written about that, about even specific CBC reporter Murray Brewster, the lead military reporter, and I did a story right at the time of the Russian invasion, that basically said that if Murray Brewster just would have been lazy and reported the things that he had previously reported, he would be offering his viewers much more context than what he was reporting. He reported about Canada's role in the 2014 ouster of Yanukovych, and how the protesters used the Canadian embassy for more than a week in ousting the elected president. He reported on the NATO summit back in 2008 and how Russia was really hostile to Canada and the US, pushing for NATO expansion. He reported on the neo-Nazis that were part of the Ukrainian forces. And so basically I was making this point because it's something that comes up a lot, where you don't know if the reporters are just lazy, if they're sycophants of power, right? They don't, they're ignorant. They don't know what's actually going on. But in the case of Murray Brewster, he himself had reported all this context that was very important to know what's going on. And so if he was just lazy, he could have just repeated what he'd previously reported and offered his, the viewers a lot more context, understanding of what was transpiring. But of course he chose not to, which speaks to the fact that he's a sycophant of power, and understood that the political wins in January, February, and since the Russian invasion don't allow for any sort of discussion of the context that leads to the Russian invasion, and most importantly, from a Canadian perspective, the Canadian context for what helped precipitate what is clearly an illegal Russian invasion. But I wouldn't say it's just, it's not complete, right? The CBC is totally, don't get me wrong, it's totally aligned with Canadian foreign policy outlook, the Canadian military. In my book, A Propaganda System, I go into all kinds of historical examples where they explicitly working with the military, so there's a long history of that. This is nothing new, but it's not complete. There are openings here and there. There is, but yeah, if you were to look at it from the outside, I'm sure it's just as propagandistic as the Russian media depiction is. On the other,
CBC had a thing about Russian propaganda a few nights ago. I think it was done by Terence McKenna, and he ended it up by talking about calling the 2014 Maidan Square. He called that a popular uprising. I'm not hearing anybody else calling that a popular uprising. Everybody else calls it a coup.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a popular component to it. I think the country is divided, but he was elected president. Everyone agrees he's elected president, and the Canadian government, Stephen Harper government, not just people try to portray, Canada just started supporting the Maidan, when the protests began. Absolutely not true. The Harper government, I wrote about this, the Harper government immediately, when Yanukovych takes office, begins the process of demonizing, of attacking. Harper actually goes to Ukraine, and he speaks at a thing, kind of a nationalist monument in the west of the country, all designed to create this sort of like tension and support the kind of nationalist, if you want to call it that, narrative of Ukrainian history against people generally in the east of the country. Then they're demonizing. Throughout his whole, so before the actual protests begin at the end of November, and then during the protest, immediately the spokesperson for the Canadian embassy in Kyiv was a top Maidan protester. Right, the spokesperson, local employee, it was a top. Canada was completely supportive of the protest and been funding opposition groups, Western-oriented groups, millions and millions of dollars. Americans, they talked about that one admission that they spent $5 billion since the breakup of the Soviet Union in supporting civil society in Ukraine. So it was a whole campaign of trying to promote a certain segment of civil society, and they played up corruption, and there was clearly lots of corruption, but there's lots of corruption afterwards and lots of corruption before, and now the corruption question gets way less attention, and we fund NGOs that are focused on corruption as a way to undermine the government we don't like, and when there's a government we do like in place, all of a sudden we're not funding corruption-oriented NGOs. but yeah, none of that context is just, it's the CBC reporters know about it. They know about it. They choose not to talk about it because it doesn't go with the zeitgeist of what, where things are at politically, and they bow down to power. Any other questions, comments? We're getting pretty close to 7, so if there aren't, then probably just wrap it up. But well, thanks everyone for coming on. And next week I'm going to have, forgetting how to pronounce his last name, but Ukrainian Canadian professor at University of Ottawa, Ivan. Anyways, forgetting how to pronounce his last name, but he's actually the one who's done the most on showing how it was far right people who actually killed at the Maidan protest. It was primarily the snipers were far right people. He's done an incredible level of detailed look at the court cases and all that's come out of that. And he's a prolific tweeter about what's going on in Ukraine from a very, I think, balanced kind of perspective. Anyways, next week he's going to be on. I'm going to be interviewing him. So if anyone has any questions, send them my way.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks.